Pues vamos a continuar como
Let's continue. We'll now hear from José Alfonso Gálvez, who's undertaking research on low emission zones. His doctoral thesis, he's a graduate in environmental sciences, and he is here today with us today as a researcher to present his work on LEZs in Europe. After that, we'll move on to the round table with the political representatives from 4 cities, Valladolid, Logroño, Sevilla and Pontevedra. And we'll be speaking with them for 2 hours, sharing their experiences and their thoughts about traffic restriction and about their projects and the measures that have been implemented. José Alfonso, good morning, everyone. I wanted to thank Clean Cities and Ecologistas in Acción for inviting me. And as we're a bit tight on time, I'll try and keep my presentation down to the minimum time. But of course, I got a number of things I'd like to share with you. It's my PhD thesis, as we said. In this workshop, we're looking at LEZs, as we all know. I'll organize my my talk in 4 blocks. What is an LEZ? What is the state of play on an international level? What are the elements which define an LEZ, and can it be classified? What is an LEZ? Okay. Firstly, I would like to say that this concept was born out of what were called environmental zones. These were in different international and national arenas. On a national level, there are 2 elements: the Integrated Energy and Climate Plan and the Climate Change Law. And at EC level, of course, there were a whole welter of measures aimed at restricting traffic as well. Limited access and also restriction for parking. So the whole focus was on, and is on, vehicles. But the environmental zones obviously meant more than this. When we thought about LEZs, as we can see in London here, the top picture, look at this, there's heavy traffic there, but it's an LEZ. But at the bottom there, you can see there's a different concept altogether of the use of the public space. In international terms then, what can we say? Well, they don't just exist in Europe, in Asia, America, but in different ways. My research work was focused, or is focused, on Europe in terms of our culture vis-a-vis traffic and the measures that we apply in Europe. There are 328 LEZs in Europe at the moment. In 2019, you can see there was a jump in qualitative terms and quantitative terms in the numbers. In terms of countries, Italy and Germany are those which have the most numbers of LEZs. But in terms of Italy, as you can see as we move forward, many of them have an overlap because there are 2 different concepts for the LEZ, the classic one, which runs through the whole year, and other ones which are only applied in the coldest months of the year in terms of the impact on air pollution. So there are 2 LEZs in here in Barcelona and Madrid, as we can see in Spain. In Madrid, there's been a lot of press. I also wanted to talk about the climate change and the energy transition legal measures. The law, in this sense, introduced certain measures which should be applied to achieve concrete goals by 2023. We have the next generation funds now, but we have to make sure that achievements are robust to achieve real progress, not just to meet targets on paper, as it were. What elements define an LEZ then? This is not an exclusive way of characterizing the concept, but nevertheless, talk about the space-related aspects, regulatory aspects, monitoring system, the implementation plan, and the basic elements. In regard to the management of space, well, LEZs don't just apply to urban settings. Some which are all applied in time terms, in terms of maybe just in winter, maybe more in terms of transport of merchandise or freight. In terms of regulatory questions, there are two main elements which differentiate them. Restrictions. Is it exclusively in terms of public transport, or in terms of freight, or in terms of commerce? Look at the different elements which make it up. The most generic element is in terms of access limitations for all types of vehicles. But this is also always linked to other restrictions, which may be the weight carried in terms of the time during the day, and technological questions. This has been spoken about previously, and we'll also continue to speak about it. In terms of the traffic directorates in Spain, there's different levels and different ways of classifying the different types of traffic and the different traffic restrictions which can be applied. Whether we're looking at petrol, we're looking at diesel, but if we're restricting access for all vehicles, and for most of them it's based on technological questions, here you can see an ICE vehicle, and on the right-hand side an electric one. But so we'd allow the electric one through, and we wouldn't allow the internal combustion engine one through. That's the classic model. In terms of the elements which define the LEZ, we need cutting-edge technology to really monitor and ensure the situation, ensure that everything's been done in the right way. In terms of bus lanes and streets where we have access for residents only, we need to ensure that that people are complying with the measures in force. The two examples here: Madrid Central, with all the different colors which are used there for restricting access and parking, and Stockholm on the bottom, when there's restrictions for cars which come from outside the area. Many of the LEZs are applied in terms of a time scale, but the approach that we need to look at here is whether we just need to apply technological elements, and whether we should give a moratorium for certain use of certain technologies and certain types of vehicle. But we feel perhaps we should also be looking at air quality and looking at the use of public spaces. Lastly, in terms of the elements defining the LEZs, I wanted to focus on three which are crucial, which are common to all of them. First is the regulatory or legal framework. It's absolutely basic for there to be laws in order to regulate the situation. Otherwise, we get problems such as the ones we had in Madrid Central, where you get loopholes for people to slip through. In another element for big cities in terms of LEZs, are there public car parks or are there other services for parking with concessions? And we need to look at what type of operations in terms of parking exist when we design the LEZs. And this type of work is essential when we're planning them. The other element which I wanted to focus on is the evaluation system. If we look at Spain, there was a big rollout, but they didn't have a modal share. They didn't have, they lacked certain of the other key elements for an ideal type of programming for measuring the quality of air, for example. We didn't have the right types of stations in place. And then governance is the third point. You need to take on board all the different stakeholders and the media too, because they can distort the message and we need to monitor what is going on there. Lastly, just to end my presentation, can we classify these zones? In the research work, I defined two parameters for this. One, based on the levels of restriction, which, as we've seen, they are varied. And then there's the technical elements, which I won't go into too much, but there's two cases in Spain. As I mentioned earlier, the results of the study here, you can see the size of the different circles for the number of LEZs and how they are defined and the restrictions that they include. Why am I talking about Madrid and Barcelona then? Well, they have a high level of definition. They managed to develop all the different laws which regulate access and regulate all essential elements for the zones, but they were planned in totally different ways. Barcelona proposed a very wide-ranging LEZ with low levels of restriction in technological terms, but Madrid planned the opposite, restricting as maximum as possible access in terms of vehicle numbers. This classification, at the end of the day, well, enables us to focus on the Barcelona case. There's a big area here, and if we see which type of vehicles are allowed in terms of the ones with petrol, the ones which are over 21 years can't go in diesel, those which are older than 15. So these are already very old vehicles, and it's very easy to renew the vehicles. So we'll maintain the same number of vehicles, but with a higher level of technology. On the right-hand side, you can see the congestion charge in London. What happened here? Depended on the level of pollution which the vehicles which wanted to come into the zone would cause, and you paid in as a consequence of the classification of the vehicle. So you can see that there was a very quick renewal, and the air quality in terms of the particles in the air, which were very dangerous. There was able to be control undertaken on these key elements in order to ensure there was an improvement. Basically, we need to apply common sense, and many of the ideas which people are trying to transmit to us that technology might solve all of the different problems that we have, because it won't. You need to look at things in a balanced manner. Thank you, José Alfonso. Are there any comments or any questions? Juan? Thank you for your talk. There are 2 LEZs in Spain, and there's going to be a boom in all this. I think over 150 medium-sized cities will be looking at introducing them. So in Italy, there was a boom. So there'll be a lot of work for consultants. What do you think about this? Do you think this will be a big impact? Well, at the beginning of my talk, I showed the graph in terms of the rise in LEZs. Most of them were in regard to Italy. They took a decision to implement this measure, and this generated a boom. But there's not much scientific documentation to show that they are being efficient. In the majority of cases, they are linked to LEZs in the winter period. And they just mean that they're driving forward a technological change. We want a technological change, but we also want a modal shift. So I think the situation we have here in Spain in terms of the European funding and the obligation that all municipalities of over 50,000 have to create an LEZ, we have to look at this overall picture and ensure things are done in the right way. Think about Granada, Madrid, Seville. Granada needs to take into account everything which is specific to Granada when it does this, obviously, and not do things in such a mad rush. Thank you, José Alfonso.